Everybody wanted to come and see and pray with the Pope. He had arrived at a side door of the cathedral, knowing now that he was growing more and more weak. They thought it'd be best entrance if he just came in the side door where they had parked his car in the parking lot. He came in, greeted a few people, led the service, and at the end of the service, they weren't sure if he was going to walk down the main aisle or not, but he did. And little by little, he would walk down and move to this side, and to this side, and to this side. My family wasn't really happy because just as he got to them, he went to the other side. And then he went out in front of the church for just a few moments to wave to the people outside. And then he went over to the side door near the front of the church. And there was Rosa Parks in her wheelchair, the lady who had refused to stand up and give her seat to some white man when she was so tired from her work. He met with her for just a moment while I was trying to get the door open. And then he went out where a golf cart was awaiting him that would take him along the sidewalk, along the cathedral, back to his car. In the golf cart was the driver and a security man. And the Pope entered the little golf cart. And the story goes that as he was being driven along the sidewalk, which was all covered up with white tinting, so no one could see him there. And along that little strip of ride, he spoke to the man who was driving the cart, and the man was bold enough to say, "Your Holiness, I wish you would pray for my wife, because she has cancer and it's pretty serious." He said, "Oh, I certainly will." And he reached in his cassock and he pulled out a rosary. And he gave it to the man. He says, "Know that I will pray for her." I call that an epiphany. When popes arrive, we always see them surrounded by huge crowds. But what people are often fascinated by is the attention they often give to one or two people. I remember one pope, I thought I was waiting for him to come in, and he had come in and then he disappeared. He was overspending a good part of his time with the sick and with the children. And then he met the huge crowds. But imagine what it meant to that man driving the cart. That one-on-one brief meeting where he was assured that the leader of the whole Catholic Church was going to be praying for his wife. You say, well, there were other people there too. Yes, there was. There was that security man. And there was that tent hiding him from the public. You see, there's always a fear that Herod is still seeking to put out the light. And so we must protect this light in our midst. It's another Epiphany story. Jesus knew the crowds. We see him with crowds, but we always get stories about Jesus and an individual, whether it be the man in the tree, the woman caught in sin. This love of God has got to become particular as much as it comes inclusive. And it fulfills what was promised about what was to come. Isaiah spoke about it in the first reading. His people had been released from bondage due to a Persian king, a non-believer, gave the Jews permission to go home and resettle where they had been taken from. God works through us all. And what does he write to his people who, when they return to Jerusalem, go, "Oh, what a mess we got here. They destroyed everything." He said, "But we will rebuild. We will make of this a new Jerusalem. And people will come from all over. There will be caravans of camels. People will bring their riches. People of all walks of life and all places will come to this new Jerusalem where they will come to know their God. And they will bring says Isaiah. They will bring frankincense and gold. And the myrrh comes in the gospel to remind us of Jesus' death. And so here's the fulfillment of this story we all grew up with, fulfilling what Isaiah had talked about. That this Jesus will be terribly, terribly inclusive. For he's going to meet with the shepherds who represent the poorest people, the outcast, and he's going to meet with the immigrant. And those in religious life, those of the leadership would go, well, I never thought that would happen. Doesn't he know we're in charge? Yeah, later. I think sometimes the popes do that. They come and all these cardinals are gathering around them. They all want to be seen with the pope. They practically live with the man, but they want to be seen by the... And the pope's constantly saying, I'd like to go see this child. Do you mind? I'd like to see this poor person. I'd like to kiss that face that's all wrinkled and warded. Because I think that's what Christ does. We wanted this country to be a new Jerusalem. And some of the founders of the country actually began a city and called it New Salem, New Jerusalem. And yet we've never quite fulfilled that dream. Even in the beginning, it was tough on Catholics to be welcomed in places. The American Indian, the natives, were somehow pushed to the side. Some came as slaves and remained that way in this new promised land. We're still working out the dream. We're still wanting this to be the new Jerusalem, where we can see a Savior who didn't come to make us into a Catholic church or a new religion, but to show us the broadness and the wideness and the inclusivity of our God, who didn't teach us to love one another, but became one another. For God is not a being who happens to love, God is love. God is not a being who happens to be a being, God is being. God is existence. God is all of that binds us together. And that's what we have to offer. That's our gift. It's not that God says, I want you to love one another. I want you to love one another because I've already embraced the other in my incarnation, in the second person of the Trinity, who embraces all that is human, all that is flesh. And what does St. Paul tell us? For he too has a dream. He has been given an insight to this exclusiveness of God. No longer is this Pharisee out protecting his solid faith from everybody who would want to take it away. This is a Paul who has been inspired to come to know that the Gentiles, now listen to what this must sound like. The Gentiles are co-workers with us. We're co-heirs with the Jews, with all that Christ has to give us. It's not that the Jewish people who became Christians simply said, I think we'll let the Gentiles in too. Yeah, give them a sideboard placed. No, they're co-heirs. What would that sound like in our day? What shock would it be? Would it be the shock that we went through St. Louis when Cardinal Ritter said, I think all of our churches and Catholic schools should be open to integration. Let's do it. They wanted to take him to court. He said, but it's the gospel. It's the gospel. What was it like for men when women got the permission to vote? What would that feeling like? That's what it must have felt like for these Jews to be told, it's about more than us. It's about all of us. That's the Epiphany. This God who appears in our midst to embrace us all, from the shepherds to the kings, to the immigrants. If there's one thing we boast of as Catholics, is that we believe in the real presence of Jesus in bread and in wine. Wow. But as I've always said, follow the bread, follow the wine. It It eventually winds up inside of us, thus reminding us, now can you believe in the real presence? Now can you believe when it's not just bread and it's not just wine, but it's flesh and blood of somebody that you're not really fond of, or some group that you think ought to be over there or over there, but not here. So on the Epiphany, we gather with the wise men, and we want to taste their wisdom. We want to discover what they discovered. Because after discovering it, they avoided Herod, the king of darkness, and they went home by another way. And that's the name they gave the followers of Jesus, people of the way. We are those people, a people of the way. May we know the grace and the gift of seeing as they saw.